Everybody, thanks for coming out. Gosh, on such short notice on a Tuesday night to talk about something as esoteric as a papal conclave. So as we gather tonight, obviously still in the heart and mind of the church is our collective grieving of Pope Francis passing. And I'll talk more about that in terms of how the timing plays out and why the timing and why the procedure is the way it is. But it includes this built-in process of collective grieving for the whole church. And for a lot of us, we might say, okay, we can get our hearts and our heads around the fact that Pope Francis passed away and we're ready for the new Pope. But for some, especially for the leadership of the church, there was close personal friendship and personal ties. And so, especially for the cardinals, there is a much more personal, at-stake grieving of a close friend and collaborator. That means that you can't just flip a switch and turn that off and move ahead. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So tonight, we really begin with this place of remembering Pope Francis. I'm not going to give any kind of big tribute to him. You can catch my rebroadcast of some of what I did with WBAL to talk about that. And plenty of other tributes, and I preached about him this weekend as well. But we begin tonight with prayer, and this is a prayer that was provided through some of the national resources that includes both our remembrance of Francis and our prayer for what lies ahead. And so let us begin remembering God's presence as we pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Lord Jesus Christ, supreme pastor of your church, we thank you for the ministry of Pope Francis and the selfless care with which he has led us as successor of Peter and your vicar on earth. Good shepherd, who founded your church on the rock of Peter's faith and have never left your flock untended, look with love upon us now and sustain your church in faith, hope, and charity. Grant, Lord Jesus, in your boundless love for us, a new pope for your church, who will please you by his holiness and lead us faithfully to you, who are the same yesterday, today, and forever. Amen. So good evening and welcome, everyone. I know a good number of people from right here at home here at St. Joseph are here. A number of you from St. Francis Xavier, which I kind of take claim for, and I'd offer some advertising there. But I understand that some other pastors have started advertising this night. Anyone here from Immaculate Heart of Mary? A few, and I know there's some people watching on live stream. Last count, we had more than 50. How many people are watching online? 90 people online. Oh, okay. A lot of people opted for the comfort of their living room for this. So I will try not to put people to sleep if they're just lying on their couches or whatever. And anybody from any other parishes that I don't know about, shout out. St. Leo's, wow, okay, welcome up. Immaculate Conception. I see cathedral people back there, so. Our Lady of Grace. Our Lady of, okay, certainly Our Lady of Grace up the road. Isaac Jogues. Oh.
St. Ignatius Loyola in Reading.
Reading, PA, wow, over the state line, okay, welcome. You might get the prize. St. John's New Freedom. Well, sounds like you came from a little further than New Freedom, but okay, but more people from down the Pennsylvania line. So welcome one and all, and who knows where people are viewing online from. I was on a meeting yesterday with some other pastors from the diocese, and people were saying, I can't wait for your conclave presentation tomorrow. And I'm like, oh my gosh, where else did they advertise this? So who knows? So we'll see how this goes. So welcome one and all. And this is a curious time. Last night we had a gathering with our newly baptized from the Easter Vigil to talk about and reflect about their experience of baptism and their first days, their first week of being Catholic. And suddenly, within a day or two of their initiation, the church is front and center on the global stage. Suddenly they're Catholic while the church is a top headline. It was funny, we were leading up to the papal funeral, and so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, lots of top story news. And by Thursday, the NFL draft kind of stepped up in first place. And it's interesting how the news shifts one day to the next. And because we've got such a break between the funeral of Pope Francis and the start of the conclave, which isn't for another 8 days, it's next Wednesday, May 7th, there's a lot of time. So, this story has kind of drifted back a little bit. It will come back in full swing by next Wednesday. The world will be watching. All the news stations eventually will have the little sidebar camera trained on the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, the smoke watch, because I remember that was the case in 2013. So here we are tonight. So the church is in this. Oops, do I even have this on yet? Do I not have enough reach? Did I put the antenna in? Perhaps I'm pressing the wrong button. No? Give me a sec. Oh wait, maybe it's frozen. Did it freeze? I think there we go. Uh-oh, this is... Of course, we tested this and it all worked. Let me unplug this and replug it. Maybe it's not. There we go. No? No, but that's not where I want to go. There we go. Okay, now we got it. All right, it was a little... So we are in this place, so I'm going to throw out this is going to be a little bit of vocabulary, technical terms. It's going to be a who's who and who you're going to see and what you're going to see. So the church is in this mode that we call sede vacante. Anybody who knows what that means? Vacant see. The see is vacant, or the seat is vacant. And so the Vatican even changes the papal coat of arms, which typically is the three-tiered tiara with the crossed keys, the two keys given to Peter. And when it's sede vacante, the tiara disappears and it's replaced with the ombrellino. And this is just the sede vacante seal of the Vatican. So if you happen to be going to Rome anytime between now and the election of the new pope, a great collector's item is to go to the Vatican post office and get a postal, to get the postmark. The postmark during sede vacante is this. Typically the postmark is the regular Vatican seal with the tiara on it, which that's what it normally looks like, which is the sign of the office of the Pope up until Paul VI. Paul VI was the one who retired the papal tiara and replaced it with the Pope wearing a simple mitre like any other bishop. But during sede vacante, this is what happens. So this is what's on display in Rome. Regular Vatican flags, I think, even come down. And so this is the status. Sometimes you hear this referred to as the interregnum, in between the reigns of popes. So let me talk about why is it that I'm doing this. I mean, there are a lot of clergy who are just, Vaticanistas, Vatican nerds. We like all things church. I've had a little bit of experience with some of this, obviously never been inside a conclave, because none of us ever have. But in just a little bit of my background and how it is that I felt that I could stand up here and do this tonight, and not just because I crammed from Google or Wikipedia or something. But in 2005, at the death of Pope John Paul II, I was completing my graduate studies, my postgraduate work in Rome, and had basically as front seat as anybody from the public could have. I, by complete coincidence of timing, was in St. Peter's Square when now St. John Paul died. We got there that Friday evening. We got there towards the end of their praying the rosary. I was with some classmates. We said, hey, let's go up. They always have the rosary these days. So we got up there. But by the time we got there, they were finishing it. So we said, okay, well, they're kind of done. So why don't we stay? And there were 3 or 4 of us. And we just said, well, we're just going to stay and pray on our own. And then like 20 minutes later, there was all of this movement up on the Sagrato, which is the elevated area at the front of the square right near the entrance to the basilica. And all of a sudden, lights are coming on up there, and there's prelates mingling around, and they came out to announce that Pope John Paul had gone home to his father's house. So we were in the square when it was announced that he passed away. And then I was present at the funeral of Pope John Paul, and I lucked out with some pretty good seats, thanks to Cardinal Keeler. I attended the funeral kind of in place of his priest secretary, so I got to sit up front where all the other priest secretaries for the cardinals were. So these are my pictures here. So that's my shot of up at the front. kind of hard to see what's up there, but that's all the cardinals gathered around. Cardinal Ratzinger was the dean of the College of Cardinals at the time, so he was presiding over the funeral. So that was my view of St. Peter's Square the day of the funeral. That's one of my classmates. We attended the Mass the morning the conclave started, so we must have been communion ministers, that we were both standing there in stoles. So we must have been recruited to be communion ministers. So the picture at the bottom is Cardinal Ratzinger presiding over the Mass the morning of the conclave as dean of the college, when he eventually, shortly thereafter, got elected. But we had a pretty good view. We were sitting right along the side of the high altar there at St. Peter's. 2 days later, I was in the square on that Tuesday afternoon, the next day, and so there at the top picture, that's me, my version of a selfie back in 2005, when you had to position like an actual digital camera before smartphones. But there in the middle there is the white smoke, and there at the bottom is my shot of Benedict the 16th coming out on the loggia as he was introduced to the church and the world. And then the day of Pope Benedict's inaugurational Mass, I got selected. The house I lived in, we got about 20 tickets to be communion ministers. That's the way it's weird to get a ticket to be a Eucharistic minister, but that's the way it works in the Vatican for priests. So I had a pretty good, these are my own shots. This top picture, it's really hard to see, but that's Pope Francis. And this cardinal right there is Cardinal Keeler. So from my view, I could see the new Pope and my own bishop right off to his shoulder. So it's just kind of right, that's Cardinal Keeler right there. Ended up with a very good seat. This middle picture here, well, that's me and a couple of my classmates. And this is the U.S. delegation, the official U.S. president, or the official delegation of heads of state. That's then Governor Jeb Bush of Florida. Next to him, behind this usher from St. Peter's, is Lieutenant Governor Steele from Maryland, was part of the U.S. delegation. And the other one was Carl Anderson, the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus. In my complete Baltimore nerdness, as they walked by, so all the communion ministers at this point, we were lined up in the basilica along the side aisle, and all these heads of state and delegations were coming through the basilica. And when they came through, all these Italians were like, "Ecco, Bush, Bush, Bush." They were all screaming to Bush. I looked over and saw Michael Steele, so I shouted his name out, and he looked over like, "Who knows who I am here?" And I'm just standing there, I'm like, "I'm from Baltimore." And so he kind of waved and said, "Oh, hey, that's great," and then kept on going. So the bottom picture is the moment, I don't know if any of you remember, so archbishops wear this white wool collar. Archbishop Lori wears it when he's around. It's a wool collar that has crosses on it that lays over top of their vestments and has a tail that comes down the front, another tail that goes down the back. And it's made of lamb's wool. It's part of the office of archbishops. The Pope, up until this point, typically wore the same pallium that regular archbishops wear, so that they all match. So Archbishop Lori's pallium, it has these little black crosses, and then there's usually little jeweled nails that represent Jesus' nails from the crucifixion. The bishop there with Pope Francis was his master of ceremonies, Archbishop Piero Marini, who had been the papal MC to Pope John Paul and was the papal MC to Benedict for at least the first part of his pontificate. The semester before, I had Archbishop Marini in class at Sant Anselmo, and it was a course on the ceremonial of bishops. My final exam question, because it was an oral exam, he comes in, he goes, "Well, let's talk about the pallium for the archbishops." I'm like, "Okay, great. I have an archbishop. I'm an MC at the cathedral. This was 20-some years ago. I'm like, I know all about the pallium because I've helped Cardinal Keeler put his on." And he says, "Well, let's talk about the ancient pallium." I'm like, "Okay." And he says, "What's the ancient pallium look like? The original early form of the pallium from the first millennium." And I remembered it from class that it was long, it was bigger, it was longer, and it hung over the shoulder instead of hanging down the middle, and the crosses were red instead of black. And he said, "Okay, what does all that mean?" And I said, "Well, the red crosses, I guess, martyrdom, blood of martyrs." "Okay, great. Why does it hang off the left shoulder?" And I tried dancing around this in Italian badly, and I eventually could not. He says, "So you don't know why it hangs off the left shoulder?" I'm like, "I have no idea." I must have missed whatever it was. And I did say, oh, because that's the way it's depicted in the mosaics in the ancient Roman basilicas. You go to like Santa Cecilia, Santa Maria in Trastevere, and some of these other basilicas that have these beautiful mosaics. Our mosaic tile's a little bland and plain. We could have done a big, elaborate thing with all kinds of saints or stuff, but we didn't. Anyway, and a lot of the early bishops and popes are depicted with the pallium hanging over the left shoulder. I said, so, oh, it's in because of that. Well, he asked why. I'm like, I never did get it. He had to tell me why. And he said that it represented the shepherd hanging his feed bag off his left shoulder so that with his right hand he could feed the flock. So that was in January of 2005 when I did not get a perfect score on my final exam. 3 months later, in April of 2005, Archbishop Marini convinced Pope Benedict to use the ancient form of the pallium. So I'm sitting there at his inauguration watching this, and I wanted to raise my hand and say, I know the answer now. So that was a little moment of kind of personal levity and connection, like, oh my gosh. And all these other people were asking about it. I'm like, I know everything there is to know about it now because I got lectured during my exam for getting it wrong. So anyway, so that was 2005. I had kind of a front seat. I had Archbishop Marini in class the semester before. We talked a lot about papal liturgy. We got a tour of the papal sacristy during that semester, so I got some inside baseball kind of behind the scenes views of some things. Nothing that pertained to anything conclave related, but I was in the city of Rome during all of that cycle and was able to come home at the end of that, at the end of my experience there after 2 years with this as kind of the crowning month. Finishing my degree and passing was certainly part of the crowning too, but got to have a front seat to this, the first conclave in 28 years. So certainly the first real conclave that I recognized. Fast forward to 2013, I was working at the USCCB. My seat at the conclave was mostly in the CNN studios in New York, where the USCCB had kind of farmed me out as a commentator. So the top one is some friend took a picture of their TV up there. That's me with Aaron Burnett out front the night Francis was elected, just hours after. And this other one, this is a morning show. That was Soledad O'Brien. That's Bishop O'Connell from Trenton, who was brought on as another commentator. But I spent the better part of a month in New York and kind of doing a lot of talking head commenting on behalf of the Bishops' Conference. So all of that's just a little introduction as to how it is that I feel like I have something to be able to offer and talk about tonight. So anyway, so that's just a little bit of background about why I have anything to offer here. So let's talk about the College of Cardinals and kind of what all of this is about at this point. So the College of Cardinals, you know, we know a little bit about it. We've been blessed to have cardinals here in Baltimore, though only 4 archbishops of Baltimore have been cardinals. Anybody name all 4? Okay, I've heard Sheehan. O'Brien. We'll start from the most recent. Gibbons and I was waiting for, I've already mentioned Keeler. So in chronological order, Gibbons, Sheehan, Keeler, and then O'Brien. So going from oldest to most recent. And so of the 16 archbishops of Baltimore, 16, only 4 have been cardinals. So we're clearly not a guaranteed cardinatial seat. So historically, this is the important stuff. Historically, the cardinals were members of the local Church of Rome. They were kind of like the council of elders for the Church of Rome. That's what the original cardinals were, would have been like the senior consultors to the Bishop of Rome, whose other title is the Pope. So all of the cardinals, and historically they were not always bishops. If any of you watched like the Borgias or any of those, you know, kind of scandalous things, you get into all these things where you get these teenage cardinals and all these kind of weird things. So historically they weren't always bishops. It's a little unclear about what their roles sometimes were. And so in modern times, cardinals can be all around the world. They can be bishops in dioceses, and certainly under Pope Francis, it's become far more diverse. I've got some stats here. I'm going to bore you with all kinds of stats in a couple of slides. But every cardinal then is given a personal relationship to the Church of Rome. And so cardinals, if they're out in dioceses around the world, they're assigned a church in Rome that becomes kind of they call it the titular church, their title, so that they have a relationship to a parish church in the city of Rome, in the Diocese of Rome, so that technically all the cardinals are still, in some spiritual way, when they gather in the conclave next week, it's essentially the figurehead clerics of Rome electing the Bishop of Rome. That's the history of the conclave in a nutshell. So Cardinal O'Brien's titular church was a small church on the Esquiline, or on the Palatine Hill, kind of right behind the Roman Forum, and it's a church that's never open to the public. Cardinal Keeler's titular church was Santa Maria degli Angeli, right by the train station in Rome. It had been the baths of Diocletian. It was a place of martyrdom of a lot of early Christians, and Michelangelo turned it into a church. Cardinal Keeler's titular church was a crown. Cardinal Gibbon's titular church was San Clemente, one of the oldest churches in Rome, where St. Clement, the fourth Pope, St. Clement, was buried. And then Sheehan's was San Clemente. Cardinal Gibbon's was Santa Maria in Trastevere, another beautiful, ancient, one of the oldest churches of Rome. So all of the cardinals are assigned a church in Rome that they have a relationship with in some spiritual way. What's that?
There are 130 some cardinals there.
Yes, but they all do. A lot of them go way out into the suburbs. Yeah, some of them are the ancient churches. Some of them get like parish churches now, like it could be the St. Joe's Cockeysville of Rome. And it might not be architecturally or historically significant. But so they're not always bishops. The number of cardinals has fluctuated over the centuries. We hear about the number 120. It was actually Pope John Paul who established the number at 120. It was a little bit lower than that prior to him. We'll get to the actual number in a few slides. And so they have this unique role in choosing the Pope because they're essentially, as I said, the clergy of Rome electing their bishop. You go back to the early church when this is how every diocese would have chosen its bishop. When there was an opening, the clergy would gather and make a selection, and then the Church of Rome would verify. And even in more modern times, the only time that in the United States a bishop has been elected by the clergy, anybody want to guess? John Carroll. The clergy of the United States then made a recommendation. Now, he wasn't elected and immediately ordained. The recommendation went to Rome, and it was approved. But Archbishop John Carroll, Bishop John Carroll, was chosen by acclaim of the clergy of Baltimore and the rest of the church in the United States at the time. So let's look at the College of Cardinals. Here's some numbers. So we'll start here. So currently as of today, there are 252 cardinals. These graphics, I'll explain what these all mean. There are 252 active cardinals. Today there are 135 eligible to vote, meaning they're under 80 years old. Pope Francis did his most recent appointment of cardinals back in November, anticipating that there were a bunch of cardinals who were going to turn 80 this year. They haven't turned 80 yet. So the number for this election is 135. The story is there is one cardinal from Spain who is too ill to travel, and there's one from Hong Kong who is saying he's too ill to travel. I just heard at dinner that he possibly is making it. So the number is likely going to be 134. And that's the key number. So this is of the total number of cardinals. The largest wedge there, so this is by continent, that largest wedge is Europe. That's nearly half. So this is the total number of cardinals in the world. So this is based on the 252. The significant number that we really need to pay attention to is the 135 voting cardinals. And so the numbers those are impossible to read. So here's the breakdown of cardinals by continent. 40% come from Europe. The next largest continent represented, anybody want to guess? Asia. It's Asia. And this is new. Then South America, North America follow after that, along with Africa. And then Asia, I'm sorry, and then Oceania is that little tiny sliver is Oceania. Here's the difference. So Europe is 40%. Here's a difference. Back in 2005, the landscape was vastly different. In 2005, the colors are all different. I'm sorry, I couldn't get the colors to match. I don't know how this did this. But the right side, the yellow wedge up top on the right, is Italy, that had 13% on its own. The rest of Europe was 14%. So altogether, Europe with Italy had 50% of the votes. The next largest continent was North America at 17%. I'm sorry, at 19%. And then 10% for South America and Africa, 9% from Asia, 2% for Oceania. So this is a huge factor that the cardinal electors, one, there's a larger number. There were 115 electors at the election of Pope Francis in 2013, just because of the cycle of retirements and deaths and everything and aging out. I'm sorry, 115 in 2005. But 115 cardinal electors, 50% of them were from Europe, and now less than 40%. And the shift of where the second largest influence is has shifted. And just greater diversity from South America, Africa, Asia, smaller influence from the United States and the rest of North America, Mexico and Canada. So here, the next little stat is the number of electors based on who appointed them. Again, sorry, I'll make sure these are available later. So of the electors today, only 5 were appointed by John Paul II, 22 appointed by Pope Benedict, and 108 appointed by Pope Francis. So now the two-thirds of 135, I've done the math, is 90. So now just because Pope Francis appointed somebody and named them a cardinal does not necessarily mean that they think or act or have the same exact vision that any one pope does. There's all these sayings about what happens. And people say, oh, you go into the conclave as pope, you come back out a cardinal, is one of the old sayings, that if you go in as the front runner, chances are you're coming out not. Except for the fact that that's not always true. 2005, Cardinal Ratzinger was hands down the front runner, and he emerged. So lots of times that those numbers don't always play out. So, but the fact remains that between John Paul and Pope Benedict, only 27 electors. There aren't enough of those to tip the scale to block a 2/3 majority that could come from the 108 appointed by Pope Francis. It means nothing because they may be thinking completely differently. And when we talk about the process in a moment, we'll get to how they surface all of this. So this probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but I thought it would be fun to look at the American cardinals, because everybody wants to know about the Americans. There are 17 living American cardinals. 10 of them are eligible to vote. The ones in gold are the non-voting. So some of these names you might not recognize. Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost is a religious order priest who he's from Chicago, spent most of his priesthood in missionary work in South America, was eventually the head of his religious order globally, got named a bishop in South America as a missionary bishop, and currently now, over the past 2 years, has served as the prefect of the dicastery for bishops in Rome. Well known among cardinals because he's the guy that runs the office that's in charge of the appointment and assignment of bishops. A powerful position in Rome. He's an American, but he's not. I mean, he's American by birth, certainly speaks English, but spent the bulk of his priesthood in South America. So he's the first one. These are in hierarchical order within the College of Cardinals, based partially on seniority and office and how long they've been cardinals. And I'll say another word that complicates this, because Prevost has not been a cardinal for very long. But when he was made a cardinal because of his office, he has a higher ranking in the College of Cardinals, and I'll explain that in a minute. The next 5 Cardinal Mahoney, formerly of Los Angeles. Adam Maida, formerly of Detroit. He was made a cardinal with Cardinal Keeler back in 1994. Cardinal Stafford, who's originally from Baltimore. Wait, did I see Jane and Michael are here? Where's Jane and Michael? So we got some Stafford relatives or connections by marriage here. Our cousins of the Staffords. Cardinal Stafford was from Catonsville and was a priest of Baltimore, served as head of Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese, eventually was an auxiliary bishop, went to Memphis, I think first, and then to Denver, and then to Rome, where he spent the rest of his career in Rome. Then Cardinal Justin Regali, who had been Archbishop of Philadelphia. Cardinal O'Malley from Boston, who just retired last year. He turned 80. Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, originally from Pittsburgh, he just retired from Houston a couple of weeks ago. His successor was just installed like 3 weeks ago. So he can still vote. Cardinal Raymond Burke, Vatican official, the last couple of jobs he had, but he's also retired. He's at 75, but he can still vote. Then Cardinal Donald Wuerl, formerly of Washington. Cardinal O'Brien, formerly of Baltimore, retired as Grand Master of the Order of the Holy Sepulchre. Currently lives in Rome, but still keeps some residence here in Baltimore. He's been out here a couple times to St. Joe. Cardinal Dolan, Archbishop of New York, needs no introduction. Cardinal James Harvey spent a good chunk of his priesthood in Rome, eventually was prefect of the papal household under John Paul and early on in Pope Benedict. He was eventually archpriest of one of the major basilicas. He's retired now, but still eligible to vote. Cardinal Supich of Chicago, Cardinal Tobin of Newark. Interesting, Cardinal Supich and Cardinal Tobin are both members of the congregation or the dicastery for bishops, influential in the United States among cardinals. And because they're in that dicastery, they're somewhat well known. Cardinal Wilton Gregory of Washington, just retired, can still vote. Cardinal McElroy, and I think I have a typo there, of Washington, just was installed a few months ago. And then lastly, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who is getting a lot of face time online. He works in Rome. He's the head of the dicastery of marriage, laity, and family life, but he was also appointed the Cardinal Camerlengo. I'll say more about that in a little bit, but you've seen Cardinal Farrell because he was the priest, he was the cardinal who made the announcement at the press conference that Pope Francis died. He was the one who sealed the apartment. He presided over some of the funeral rites, the transfer of the body, and the like. I'm going to get into these offices in another slide or two. So that's the American cardinals. You know, everybody's like, oh, do any of these have a chance? I remember in 2013, everybody was saying, Cardinal Dolan, he's papabile. The chances of an American being elected pope are pretty slim. Now, a lot of commentators are saying nationality doesn't mean much anymore. You know, is it going to be an Italian? Is it going to be another South American? Could it be an Asian? And most commentators say nationality doesn't really matter. And then you ask them about Americans, and they say, oh, no, an American will never get elected. So it doesn't matter except for us. And I really think that if there's any chance for any of them, it could be Prevost, because he's viewed as not really American, because he's never really worked in the United States. Okay, so I mentioned that there's some other structural hierarchical things in the College of Cardinals, and this is really the only time you see it play out. In the College of Cardinals, so you've got 252 cardinals, 135 are eligible to be electors. The College of Cardinals is divided into three orders: cardinal bishops, cardinal priests, and cardinal deacons. Now, this does not mean that behind all these cardinals that we see who are bishops, that there's a whole group of priests and a whole group of deacons. They are almost all of them, I say almost all, I'll get to the exception in a minute. They are just delineations of seniority within the College of Cardinals. When a bishop in a diocese gets made a cardinal, usually they are made a cardinal priest. And it means that they're a pastor, that they're working in a diocese, and that's just by protocol they're made cardinal priests. And that's that's where they stick. So the vast majority of the members of the College of Cardinals are cardinal priests. There are some who are made cardinal deacons, mostly by virtue of their role, and it means that they're cardinals, but they're not bishops serving in dioceses. So for most cardinals working in Rome, in Vatican offices, when they are appointed cardinals, they're made cardinal deacons. And what it affects how they're assigned a church in Rome. that the diaconal churches for the cardinals tend to be smaller churches that aren't really parish churches. So when Cardinal O'Brien was named a cardinal, he was created as a cardinal deacon. He was eventually promoted after a few years as a cardinal. He was promoted to a cardinal priest, so he's currently a cardinal priest. There are certain offices in the Vatican that when they are named cardinals, they are made cardinal bishops. And so that's why on the last screen, Cardinal Prevost, who is the newest of all those American cardinals, is at the top of the list because he's a cardinal bishop, because he's the head of that powerful office in the city of Rome. And so the hierarchical ranking within the College of Cardinals, there are certain things that happen. The dean of the College of Cardinals, who's kind of the head of all the cardinals, this will be my next slide after I finish this, the dean of the College of Cardinals is the senior ranking cardinal bishop. So he might not be the oldest in the entire College of Cardinals, but he's the highest ranking in the highest tier in order of seniority. And usually, among the cardinal bishops, usually age as well. So I said this doesn't mean that they're not bishops, because by and large, they're all bishops. There are exceptions. Typically, when the Pope names cardinals, they reserve a couple of spots and give them to priest theologians who've served the church well, and they're given this honorary title as a cardinal, but they're not bishops. Typically, they're over 80 at the time they're appointed. In the United States, the most famous was Father Avery Dulles, who was the brother, wasn't he the brother of John Foster Dulles? Or the nephew? I think he was the brother. Or was it his father? I don't remember now. He was related to John Foster Dulles, the great politician or diplomat. Father Avery Dulles taught at Catholic University for a long time. He was a great professor of ecclesiology. And so he was named a cardinal under Pope John Paul. And he did not get ordained a bishop. He was over 80 when he was named, but he was still pretty active. So he would show up at things and he could vest as a cardinal. He didn't wear a mitre. Like if they were celebrating Mass, he couldn't vest as a bishop with a mitre. But if they were all in their cardinal robes, he'd join them in their cardinal robes. He was never made a bishop, because Jesuits generally refuse that. And he was over 80 at the time he was named. So he was never eligible to vote in a conclave. This time around, for the first time in modern history, one of these theologian cardinals slipped in. He was named last November at age 79, and he didn't turn 80 yet. And so Father Timothy Radcliffe, I didn't pull a picture of him, who is a Dominican priest in England, in the UK. At one time, he was the head of the Dominican order in the whole world. But he's well known as a theologian. If you get Magnificat, sometimes you might see little reflections from him because it's a Dominican-based publication. And so once in a while, you'll see something of his. He's only 79, and he's going to the conclave. He's one of now 4 cardinal electors from the UK. So it's probably the biggest delegation the UK's had. And it'll be the first time in modern history that a non-bishop cardinal, and he's definitely a cardinal deacon because he's not even a bishop. So it'll be an interesting moment that this priest gets to go into the conclave and cast a vote as a cardinal, because he is. Just made it. I don't know when his birthday is, but he just made it. Okay, so I've started mentioning a couple of these titles within the College of Cardinals. Here's the people that you're going to be hearing about over the coming days. We've already heard about the Cardinal Camerlengo. So there's Cardinal Farrell sealing the doors of Pope Francis' residence. Doesn't this look like a shot from the movie? This is one of the scenes that they got really right in that movie. And when I saw the video footage on Vatican News last week, I'm like, wait a second. For a quick moment, I thought, is that the movie? No, wait, that's Cardinal Farrell. I know Cardinal Farrell, that's him, so that's the real thing. So he's the Cardinal Camerlengo. He's the guy who's basically like the chief operating officer in the absence of a pope. He is making sure that whatever essential operations of the Vatican that have to continue are continuing, which is basically getting ready for the conclave, making sure people are getting paid to do their jobs, and making sure those essential things are happening. Regular business, like appointment of bishops, any kind of processes, for any of you who've been part of any parish appeals from closings, all of those offices are shut down in the absence of a pope, because all of the heads of those departments have to be reappointed. So all of regular Vatican business ceases. The Cardinal Camerlengo was in charge of assembling the first gathering of cardinals to assure work on the scheduling of the funeral. So the Cardinal Camerlengo is kind of he's the chief operating officer, making sure things are happening. The real key figure is the dean of the College of Cardinals. I said the senior cardinal bishop. That's Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re. He's an Italian. He had been the prefect of the dicastery, or then the congregation for bishops, very powerful position in Rome. He's 91 years old. He presided and preached at the funeral on Saturday. So the dean of the College of Cardinals presides over the conclave. The challenge is that Cardinal Re is too old to go in. So in that case, the law, the procedures for the conclave say that the running of the conclave once they're in the conclave defers to the next senior ranking cardinal bishop who is eligible to go in. And that is Cardinal Pietro Parolin, pictured down below, who is the Cardinal Secretary of State. We'll hear Parolin's name again. The other person, and I didn't pull a picture of him because I couldn't find a decent picture of him, the proto-deacon, which means the senior cardinal deacon in the diaconal rank of the College of Cardinals, is Cardinal Dominique Mumberte of France. He is the head of the Apostolic Tribunal, the Signatura, which is the senior Vatican court. He's French. You will see him on the loggia announcing the new pope. The senior cardinal deacon is the one who does that. And that's just by tradition. I don't know why the dean doesn't do it. I think chances are the dean is often a candidate and he can't go out and announce himself. So the senior cardinal deacon comes out and is the one who goes to the loggia and says, Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, I announce to you good news of great joy, habemus papam, we have a pope. So you'll see Cardinal Mumberte at that moment. That'll be his one moment to do that. So these are the key figures that you're going to hear talked about. All right, so process. We're going to move kind of quickly. My goal is to be done by 8. Okay. So what's the process? Well, part of the process has already happened. Pope Francis passed away. I'm not going to go back and deal with all of that. But the funeral of the deceased pope took place. So here we are. And right now we're in what we call the Novem Diales, the 9 days of mourning. Some people think that the 9 days of mourning start the day the Pope dies. The 9 days of mourning are established as dates by the Camerlengo and the cardinals who were already assembled in Rome. That's one of the first decisions they make, is they set the date for the funeral, and then the 9 days of mourning follow after the funeral. This is what I was saying at the beginning. There's a reason that we have this, so that the cardinals have time, one, in a very human way, to grieve and then move on to the next step without doing all of that simultaneously. The other thing that happens is during these 9 days, so each of these 9 days there is a mass offered somewhere in the Vatican or somewhere else in Rome. I think some of them might be in the other basilicas. A mass for the deceased pontiff. Some of those are open to the public. Some of those might be more limited, like there's probably one that's for Vatican workers that might be a little bit more private for people who had interaction with the Pope on a day-to-day basis. There was the first of the Novem Diales after the funeral was Sunday in St. Peter's Square. It was open to the public. Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State, presided at that. And then each day there was a different cardinal assigned to preside and preach at these 9 days, these 9 masses. Most of the cardinals will get to some of them. They don't all go to all of them because they might be bussed around town for some of these. But the other thing that's happening during these 9 days is the bigger reason that we have this gap between the two. And so what's happening each day, what they call the general congregations. And these are assemblies of all the cardinals in Rome, even the ones who are too old to vote. And so every day there are meetings of the cardinals. And some of it is they're handling some of the essential business. And I said, in parentheses, there's the particular congregations. So every 3 days, they're electing a group of 3 cardinals, one from each order. So 1 cardinal bishop, 1 cardinal priest, and 1 cardinal deacon, who are elected for a 3-day term to assist the Cardinal Camerlengo in the essential work of the church. So they might have these sidebar meetings like, oh gosh, we've got to move money around so we can pay payroll this week, and can you authorize this? Or, we've got workers who are having trouble fixing or getting the things ready in the Sistine Chapel. We need to go and address something. The general congregations is all the cardinals. They're dealing with larger matters of the life of the church, essentially. But most of what they're doing now is discussions to prepare for the conclave. So every day, they might have subjects that they'll talk about, like the state of the world, the state of the church. Eventually, they're beginning to flesh out among themselves, as each one individually, and collectively they begin thinking about, what are we looking for? What do we need in a pope? There's prayer affiliated with these meetings. So part of the purpose of these meetings is for them to get to know each other, to build fraternity among each other, praying together, sharing meals together, though at the moment they're not sequestered yet. So like the American cardinals, most of them are staying at the North American College, the American Seminary in Rome. They can just walk down the hill and be right there in the Vatican. Other cardinals might have places where they stay. The cardinals who live in Rome are still staying in their own residences. They won't report to the Domus Santa Marta, the building that was built to house cardinals during the conclave, until probably Monday or Tuesday of next week. They'll have to be there Tuesday evening so that they're ready for the opening Mass on Wednesday morning. So these general congregations, they have time to get to know each other. They'll all get opportunities to speak at different times. There might be moments where they break up into groups, maybe in language groups, so that they can have conversation. They're meeting in the meeting room that's called the Synod Hall, and it's upstairs above the audience hall. If you've ever been to the Pope Paul VI audience hall for indoor papal audiences, this is upstairs from that. It's a high-tech room that's got screens and projection, and importantly for them, simultaneous translation. So at all their seats, they have little headsets and multiple channels that they can pick, and there's somewhere up on a screen that says 1 for English, 2 for Spanish, 3 for French, 4 for German, and how many languages they have, I don't know. I went to a conference there once, and it was kind of cool sitting there, and you could just change channels. And up in the back somewhere, they have booths where people are sitting to do all the translation. They get all of that translation during these meetings. All of that ceases when they go into the conclave itself. Say more about that in a minute. So right now, these general congregations that will happen every day, they'll break on Sunday, of course, but up until the date of the start of the conclave, they'll be meeting just about every day. They won't meet on Thursday, May 1st, because it's a national holiday in Italy. So Italy will have it's their Liberation Day. Is it Liberation Day for them? It's some big national holiday for them. What's it? It might be Worker Day. They also have their Liberation Day somewhere in there, but May 1st is a national holiday for them. So even in the Vatican, they have to observe that. So I did see that they're not meeting on Thursday, and then they won't meet on Sunday because it's Sunday. Yeah, everybody takes off. So that's what's happening now. And if you saw the movie did a pretty good job of, I would say the first half of the movie is pretty accurate. You get the human side of it. They're all coming together. They're having their conversations. They're talking to the people they know. And, some of them are starting to have the conversations about what do we need? Who are we looking at? I think the movie got a little bit too political too quickly because I don't think they approach it quite that way. So anyway, the rest of the schedule, May 7th will begin. That's the date of the conclave. They'll begin with Mass in the morning, Mass for the election of a new pope. We will have that morning, the morning Masses here at St. Joe, that day will be the Mass for the election of a new pope. So in the Missal, in the Roman Missal, there's actually a Mass with prayers to offer on the occasion of the election of a pope. We get these few days every 10 or 15 years that we can use these prayers. So next Wednesday, we will officially, the 2 Masses on Wednesday morning here will be that. And then, so Mass is in the morning, and then after Mass, they'll take a little bit of a break, and then they will line up, and they have the grand procession into the Sistine Chapel for the beginning of the conclave. So what happens then? I mean, here's all the secret stuff, some of which we know, some of which nobody knows because we're not in there, but the documents that govern the process are quite specific, and we can put together a pretty good picture. And the movie even got a pretty good snapshot of the ritual. Right? They had some good consultation. The document that governs the conclave is on the Vatican website. You can just search on it and you can read the whole thing. It reads like a church document about all the procedures, about how every little thing happens. So when they process in, and this part will be on television, they'll process in, the Sistine Choir will be singing the Litany of Saints. They sing the Veni Creator Spiritus at some point, invoking the Holy Spirit. There are some other prayer moments. And then eventually, I'm not going to read all this, but this is the Cardinal Dean, the one presiding over the conclave, will read this oath on behalf of all the cardinals. And it's 3 parts. It basically says that we each pledge to uphold all of the procedures and that any one of us, if elected, will accept the outcome, which basically they're all saying to themselves, yes, I pledge that if I get elected, I will accept it. They're saying it right out, all 130 of them are saying this. And the third part, the second part, that's the first paragraph is, we'll follow all the procedures, and if I'm chosen, I'll say yes. And the second part is secrecy, and that even after the fact, the proceedings of the conclave remain secret unless the new pope determines otherwise. So the pope could at some point say it afterwards that he would release people, or they would release some information and say this information could now be public record. Eventually Pope Benedict did that after the 2005 conclave, and I think Francis did release some information, or allowed for the release of some information. Otherwise, everything that's notated and documented is given back to the new pope and placed in a secret archive. So it's up to the Pope to determine it. And then the third part of the oath is saying that they will refrain from any outside influence. Basically saying, yes, I'm cut off from society. I will not allow anyone to influence me or my decision or my vote, and I won't try and manipulate or influence anyone else. So the dean reads all of this, and then each cardinal goes up one by one. This part's documented on video. They come up one by one and place their hand on the book of the Gospels, and then each of them in Latin basically puts their name on it, saying, yes, I attest to this, so help me God in these holy Gospels, which I touch with my hand. So that's, at that point then, someone gives a reflection, and it's Cardinal Cantalamessa, who's another theologian cardinal, not a bishop. He will have to leave after his reflection because he's over 80. And so after this, somebody will give this little exhortation or homily, and that's that point that the Master of Ceremony, Archbishop Ravelli, will stand up and announce the extra omnes. Anybody extra, out. So anyone who is not a cardinal, eligible to vote. The only person who stays in is the Master of Ceremonies to the College of Cardinals. That's Archbishop Ravelli. And he may actually leave while they're voting. He may not be in the room, but he stays close because the minute somebody's elected, he goes in and begins the ritual to get the guy ready for all of that. So once the oath is taken, they've had the initial reflection, then the election process begins after the doors are closed. So what happens? So they distribute ballots, and they have these little ballots that say, I elect, and then there's a blank line that they write their name on. And there's a pen at all of their places. So they give out ballots, so each of them has several for that session. They elect 3 scrutineers, 3 infirmarians, which is not people to take care of the sick, but in case some cardinal falls ill and is remaining back at the Domus Santa Marta where they're staying, they're still eligible to vote. And so they elect these 3 infirmarians who would be the ones to go with a lockbox to the sick cardinal's room, let them fill out their ballot, and then they bring it back and add it in. And then they elect 3 revisers. So that's the 3 scrutineers and then 3 revisers to review the counting at each ballot, just to make sure everything's all accurate. So they do that on the first day. And those people are in place as long as they need to. They may decide that after a few days, if it goes on for a while, they may elect new scrutineers just to give the guys a break, but they don't have to. So they do the election, then they fill out ballots. All of this happens in silence. There's no conversation, there's no canvassing, nobody's getting up and giving talks or anything. This is the mysterious part, because they're doing this prayerfully. And then the casting of the ballots does not happen. They don't just pass the basket around. They go up one by one. Again, the movie got this pretty right. They go up one by one in order of precedence. So they're seated in order, so they know what the order is. They go up, and one by one, they say this formula: I call as my witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be elected. And they place their ballot in the urn that's up there at the altar in the front. All 135 of them do this. And so each ballot, when you think of one vote, probably takes them more than an hour to do, because they're doing all of this. And then the counting of ballots is not exactly quick. So the counting of ballots begins, they count the ballots, so they dump out all of the ballots from the urn, and that all have to be folded the same way. They count them to make sure there's the right number, that they didn't skip somebody didn't try to put 2 in or more. So if they don't have the right number, they toss it all and start over for that ballot. I don't know if that's ever happened in modern times. We're getting to the needle. So at the front, there's a table with 3 scrutineers. So they're there. The first scrutineer opens it up, reads it, makes a note. So they've got a piece of paper that lists every cardinal. And they're like, okay, Cardinal Smith, 1 vote. And they're not reading it out loud, but the one reads it, makes a note. Passes it to the second one, reads it, makes a note. Passes it to the third one, who reads it out loud, and most of the cardinals are all kind of doing their own count. And then when the third one reads it, then he pierces the piece of paper with a needle and has a thing of thread. And so basically all of the ballots are getting put on this threaded needle to make sure that they're not double counting anything. So they've got this table full of all these ballots. So once one is read, attested, read out loud, pierced with the needle, collected on the thread. So at the end of it, they've got the wad of all the ballots from that vote. So we do all of that. Then they total up the votes. If there's no election, then so the revisers review and count everything. They go back and recount to make sure it's all accurate. 2/3 majority is required. I already said that. 90 votes if all 135 electors are needed. So if they don't come to a conclusive vote, in most of the sessions, the first day, they'll only conduct 1 vote because it's going to take them an hour or more just to do the oath and elect the scrutineers and all of that. So they'll do 1 vote. If it's inconclusive, they take the ballots, put them in the stove with all the related documentation, and any notes that any cardinals took is all gathered up, put into the stove. In modern times now, there's some chemical canister that goes in to make sure that the smoke is clearly the color that it's supposed to be. Historically, it's like, is it black? Is it gray? Is it white? And you never knew. Now, black smoke is very black, and white smoke is very white. It takes a minute. It might look a little bit gray, but it very quickly becomes either jet black or bright, bright white. So when there's an inconclusive vote, if it's in one of the regular sessions, like the second morning, the morning of the 8th, they'll have a session. If the first vote is inconclusive, they just push everything aside and move right to a second vote without burning anything. So they do get some efficiency there. So they'll go to the second ballot. If that ballot's inconclusive, they take everything from both ballots and burn it as black smoke, and then they take their break for lunch. That will go on for 3 days, as long as they need to. At the end of 3 days, if they're still inconclusive, the governing documents say they take a day off for prayer, conversation. They may go back into some meetings so that they can have more conversation and time for them, and there'll be some time for prayer again. And then they go back in and they do all of this up to 7 more ballots. And after another 7, if they're still inconclusive, they take another break.
Are they still sequestered?
They're still sequestered. They're not taking breaks, say, okay, go have a free day. You can leave sequestering and go back out into Rome, go to your favorite restaurant. No, they're staying sequestered in all of this. They're completely cut off. They have no access to news or anything. That could go on for a while, supposedly, but who knows? So they have these moments of prayer, and there's prayer at the beginning of each session. They certainly, before they come over in the morning, they celebrate Mass. If they get to Sunday, they'll certainly have time for Mass on Sunday. So at the time of the election, so they reach the 2/3 majority, the dean or whoever is acting, Cardinal Parolin in this case, will come and go to the person and say, and I think the movie got this right, that once they get to the number, they all start to clap. They'll finish counting the votes, but they know when the person gets to the number that they'll all start clapping. But when the votes are all counted and it's officially tallied, the dean will come and stand before the person and say, do you accept your canonical election? And then immediately, by what name do you wish to be called? So they've got to be prepared for that. And I suspect that they're watching the numbers, they're watching the tallies, and there'll probably be 3 or 4 who are starting to creep up in vote counts. So those are probably starting to think about, okay, this could be serious, and where's this all going to go? So then the white smoke goes up, and then things start happening outside of it. Before that, they go and they get vested. They go into the room of tears where there are several pre-made sized cassocks. They said it was always a joke that there was a small, medium, and large. I think there's more than 3 these days. To get them set. And before everything happens publicly, the new pope comes out and all the cardinals go and make their pledge of fidelity and their congratulations to them, so that all happens privately. And at that point then, the white smoke's going up, the bells ringing, people are scrambling and racing across town to get to the piazza to see all this. And then the announcement happens, I announce to you good news of great joy, we have a pope. This again is Cardinal Momberti, the proto-deacon, who will announce this. Here's the English translation of it. I announce to you good news of great joy. We have a pope, the most eminent and most reverend Lord Edwin, Cardinal of the Holy Roman Church, O'Brien. He won't even be in the room, so he won't get elected. Who has taken the name, I'm hoping it's going to be Sixtus VI, because the last Pope Sixtus was Sixtus V. I suspect that's why no one has chosen it since, but I think it would be cool to have Pope Sixtus VI. We'll all struggle with it forever. I was just kind of thinking of cool pope names we haven't had in a long time. So here's some factoids, and then we're going to wrap up. So people say, how long do you think it's going to take? I went back and looked at the last several conclaves, how many ballots it took for the election. For Pope Francis, it was 5 ballots. So the 1 ballot on the first evening, the first afternoon, and then the next day, 2 ballots in the morning, 2 ballots in the late afternoon. Because by the time Francis came out on the loggia, it was dark. It was early evening. In 2005, Pope Benedict was elected on the 4th ballot. So it was 1 ballot in the afternoon the first day, 2 ballots in the morning, and the first ballot in the afternoon session. Pope John Paul, interestingly, the year of 2 conclaves within 2 months of each other, October, when John Paul was elected, John Paul I was elected in August. Interestingly, they came back in after only being there 2 months before. It took 8 ballots to elect John Paul II. John Paul I was elected in 4 ballots in the August 1978 conclave. Paul VI in 1963, 6 ballots. Pope John the 23rd in 1958, 11 ballots. Okay, somebody asked me the other day, I knew the longest, I did not know the shortest. The shortest conclave was in 1503, 1 ballot. They were only gathered for 10 hours to elect Pope Julius II. The longest conclave in history, somewhat famous, 1268 to 1271 in the city of Viterbo. The previous pope died in Viterbo. It's about 50 miles outside of Rome. And so the cardinals were all gathered for the funeral of the previous pope, and they got in there. This was before they were locked in. This is the reason why they're now locked in. There was so much political infighting that they would meet for a while, they would stop, and eventually the townspeople of Viterbo got tired of taking care of them. And so in 1271, that should be 1271, not 1272, typo there. In fall of 1271, they cut off the food supply and limited them to bread and water. And they locked them in. This is the first time we use the word conclave. The word conclave, I should have started there, means conclaves with keys. meaning they're locked in. And it was because of this, in 1271, they locked them in, they made a couple of holes in the roof and cut off the food supply to get them to come to an agreement. And they ended up doing an election by compromise. A committee of 6 cardinals was elected to break the stalemate. In modern times, that can no longer happen. There has to be, if they get into some kind of stalemate after several breaks, they could choose by a simple majority to say, we're now going to limit the ballot to 2, like the 2 top vote getters. But they still must, under Pope Benedict XVI, he made this clarification that there must be a 2/3 majority. There'd be concern that somebody would just wait it out, that eventually you could get to a simple majority. And then suddenly you've got this issue, you've got a pope that's not really widely supported by even the College of Cardinals. So the 2/3 majority has to stand, but they could get to a point that they limit the ballot to the top two, as opposed to just anybody. Because when they start, there's room, they could write any baptized male is eligible to be elected pope. They don't even have to be a priest. Now you'd have a pretty hard time getting 2/3 of the cardinals to elect somebody that none of them know. Chances are it's going to be somebody in the room. And I'd say any baptized male who's eligible to be ordained a priest and a bishop, because they have to immediately be ordained. What's that?
Don't even have to have confirmation.
No, baptized, so they'd have to be confirmed, ordained a priest and a bishop, and it's immediately ordained. So that's why it's going to be somebody who's in the room. So there's the shortest and longest conclaves. Okay, my last slide, because everybody wants to know. The papabile. So everybody's got their theories. And you turn on any of the news channels, everybody's got their commentators who are doing all of this. I have so far resisted throwing out names. But here's a lot of the obvious choices. Most of this list is going to be, obviously, you will have already heard most of these names. And sadly, there's actually betting odds on some of these guys. It's kind of freakish that in modern terms. So I've broken this list down into, we've already gone past my time, but you all seem like you seem like you're doing okay. You've been waiting for this moment, okay. I don't, does the off-track betting down here in Timonium have all this stuff? Oh, everybody. Okay, I don't have, so the numbers that are going to appear here are not odds, I have their ages. Because my comments will be around kind of what's the picture look like. So I broke the list down into 2 categories. One is Vatican officials, and the other is diocesan bishops. So cardinals who are out in the world serving as archbishops or bishops of dioceses. And then the first half is Vatican officials. And we can look back historically, and you kind of see a little bit of both, and it's not that it goes from one to the other, but Benedict XVI was elected in 4 ballots. He was a long-time Vatican person. He was the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. He was the dean of the college. He was pretty much probably running most of the Vatican during John Paul's last couple of years because he was pretty frail. And I think that's part of what might have motivated Benedict's own resignation, because he knew what was going on in the last years of John Paul, that everybody but the Pope was running the church. And he didn't want to be the one to let that happen on his watch. I think it was a great gift that he gave to the church to open that up in modern times, to say, we could have a priest or a pope who gets Alzheimer's or has a massive stroke and is completely incapacitated. And so he opened up that there's a mechanism when that happens for there to be succession when there needs to be, because the church needs that. So my first category, and these are, I don't want to say they're in no, well, because these are kind of in order. You'll see. So at the top of the list is Parolin. He's the Secretary of State. And part of it, for them to get 2/3, for them to get votes, they've got to know and trust. And so Parolin is the Secretary of State. If the cardinals know anyone, it's him. He's the second in command. He's already very active in running the church. Downside for him, he's a diplomat. That's not a bad thing. But he's never been a pastor. He was never a diocesan bishop. He worked his way up through the Vatican Diplomatic Corps, works in the Secretary of State, so he had been a nuncio at one point out in a country, I don't know where he served. But he's never been a pastor of any sort. Career diplomat, career Vatican person, not a bad thing. I think he's the odds-on. If you were going to place odds, he's the most likely candidate. The Secretary of State's been elected before. It's probably more often than any other. I don't have a stat on that. But if there's anybody who's come out of a particular office into the papacy, it's probably been a Secretary of State. Tagle, Cardinal Luis Tagle from the Philippines, he's the head of the Office of Evangelization, which is kind of a key theme, evangelization, preaching the gospel. You hear people say, we want somebody joyous. He has that infectious smile. But he's also been a pastor. He was Archbishop of Manila. He was a parish priest. So, and he's a current Vatican person. So his name gets mentioned a lot. I mentioned Robert Prevost. I only have him on here because you never know where things might go, and they might need the compromise candidate. Like if they've got two candidates that are vying and both getting votes, but they might be vastly different, they might slip in. Cardinal Prevost has been missionary activity. He heads the Congregation for Bishops. He's got language skills. He's an American, but he's not. I think it's our only chance for an American at this point. Cardinal Gretsch runs another Vatican office. He's from Malta. He gets named once in a while. Cardinal Peter Turkson of Ghana has been in the Vatican for a long time, but his age, he's 76 now. You know, Gretsch at the other end is 68, a little bit young. You know, the younger they are, the potential longer papacy you've got. So, you know, Cardinal Turkson at 76 might be, you know, we've elected two 78-year-olds, and John Paul was 84 when he died, which means we've been more than 20 years with having somebody in their late 70s or beyond running the church. Wisdom and experience is great, but stamina is another question, and I suspect that they might be looking for somebody a hair younger. And I'm thinking, if it were me, I'd be saying late 60s, early 70s might be the sweet spot, if age is going to be a factor, which I think it could be. And then my dark horse candidate, very young, is Cardinal Konrad Krajewski from Poland. He was one of Pope John Paul's Masters of Ceremony, so he's worked in the Vatican since John Paul. Pope Francis made him a cardinal. He's called the papal aumônier. He's the guy who goes out and cares for the poor and the homeless in and around Vatican City. He's the one who had the showers built for the homeless, and there's like a hospital or there's a kind of an urgent care thing for the homeless. He's been to the Ukraine numerous times bringing aid from the Vatican. He could be a dark horse candidate because, you know, he's quietly been doing all of this. I don't know much about him theologically, but he's been in the Vatican a long time. And so he could, I think he's young, but, okay, so there's some diocesan bishops. The one who's getting a lot of chatter now is Pier Battista Pizzaballa, the Patriarch of Jerusalem. So that could have political connotations because he's right there in the middle of the war in the Middle East. He's Italian by birth. He's a Franciscan, so he's spent more than 30 years in the Middle East as part of the custody of the Holy Land. If you've ever been to the Holy Land, the Franciscans who run all the Holy Land shrines, he's been part of that. So he's Italian by birth and formation and training, but he's been in the Middle East for more than 30 years. His language skills would be good. He'd speak English, he'd speak Arabic, as well as being Italian. It could be an interesting take politically. I think if they were going to go in this direction, it would make a political statement. And whether they'd want to do that or not, I don't know. But he's getting a lot of chatter. He's also he's not even 60 yet. So we'd be looking at like another John Paul kind of trajectory, 25, 30-year papacy. Peter Erdo from Budapest is considered a little bit more traditional, quite scholarly as a theologian. He's the right age. He's also very tall. He'd be like one of the tallest popes. He's a big guy. That could be a fascinating. He's pastoral. He's compassionate. He's a scholar, but he's considered a little bit more traditional and maybe a little bit of I wouldn't say that's a radical swing, but it could be a little bit of a response. But he's a diocesan bishop. Gerald Lacroix from Quebec. He's one of the newest cardinals. I think long shot for him. He's young, and he was just made a cardinal last year. So, but his name comes up. Some groups put Joseph Tobin from Newark on this list. He's a Redemptorist. He has language skills. He was the head of the Redemptorist order in Rome for a number of years, and then he worked in the Congregation for Religious. So he's been a Vatican official, he ran a religious order globally, and he's a diocesan bishop now, and he's on the Congregation for Bishops. I think it's a long shot for an American, and he's truly an American. He's the Archbishop of Newark. Matteo Zuppi from Bologna gets a lot of chatter. He rides his bike around Bologna to get around. He's considered probably the most close carbon copy to Francis. He's young, he's outgoing, he's vigorous, and he would maybe be considered like Francis II. I doubt anybody's going to take that name. But if they want to look for somebody to really fully continue the Francis path, it could be he. And then the last one is this bishop from the Congo, Cardinal Besungo. His name comes up a lot simply as an African possibility because of what he's experienced in the Congo. I don't know much about him. He's on the younger side of this. He's 66, which is still, or 65, which is still a little bit young. So that's my take. I know I spent a little bit longer than I would have thought. Most of these names, I think all of these names appear on other people's lists. I looked at a lot of other commentators whom I trust, and the other saying, I said this the other day to some folks. I heard John Allen say this. He's a Vatican commentator with Crux of the News or Crux Now. He's been a Vatican commentator for like 30 years, and he knows his stuff. He had the quote the other day. It's an Italian saying that if you have a fat pope, a thin pope always follows. I think they meant that. It may have gotten said from John the 23rd to Paul the 6th. But what it really means is that they go in, they don't look for a carbon copy of the last guy. And so they're not going to go in and say, who's going to be the next Francis? They didn't do that with John Paul. They didn't do it after Benedict. And you look at just the last three, Pope John Paul was the philosopher, the mystic. Beautiful, sometimes hard to understand. Well, I would read his writings, and I'd have to read them multiple times and still not get them. Benedict was the theologian, the teacher, because that was his early career. He taught theology, and he was German, helps that he was very methodical. His writings were quite precise, and he was the theologian. And then you get Francis, who's the heart of the pastor, who never really left Buenos Aires in some ways. And so you get three different, their differences are far more stylistic than anything else. They've all got nuances, and you can try and pigeonhole them, but I think it comes down to a lot of stylistic differences. And they're not going to go out and look for the next copy of any one of them. I'm saying, oh, well, maybe we need a combination of all of them. Well, you want a combination of all 266 popes. It's the collective wisdom of the church is 2,000 years old. We can't just look at the last 20 years and say, okay, here's where we are now and here's what we need. And certainly our American experience of the church, when you go back and look at the gap, I didn't show this statistic, but a stat I heard the other day, the church in the United States makes up 3%, 3, not 30, 3% of the global Catholic population. We can't claim to have the corner of the market on what's needed, because we're not the majority. We certainly don't have a majority block anywhere in the voting. But if you were to break up the voting based on Catholic population, it would be skewed very differently than even what the College of Cardinals looks like. At the end of the day, they will go in, they will have all these days to converse and study and debate, and there'll probably be debates. There'll be people who disagree with each other. But when they go into the conclave, when the doors close, the conversations stop, and it's all about prayer. They call upon the Holy Spirit. They sit in silence and listen to the promptings of the Spirit in their own hearts. And when that begins, the Holy Spirit has ways of knowing what we don't yet know. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to happen. And we pray along with the cardinals. And we also pray for the grace. We're not taking the oath like they are, but we pray for the grace to also accept what comes of all of this. And it's part of our own profession of faith that we believe. We stand here on Sundays and say, I believe in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And this is a work of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, particularly the apostolic part. Here's the successors of the apostles. That apostolic is really about the church built on the apostles. And we trust the successors of the apostles to make this decision for the next bit of succession. Amen? Amen. Well, we've gone longer. So we'll take a minute. We could be here all night doing questions, but I'll take a couple. Yeah. I will put the whole PowerPoint slides up. I don't want to post this list separately somewhere and say Father Rick's picks. We'll put the whole thing as a series of PDF slides. It'll just be a PDF document that you can download. Oh yes, Eucharistic adoration this Friday is First Friday. We're doing adoration, and we're making it for the intentions of praying for Pope Francis and for praying for the College of Cardinals as they prepare. Obviously, the conclave doesn't start for a few more days, but it's not too early to pray. Late. That's been in the books for a while. What the clarification about that they could do voting for only the top two. The clarification was that Pope Benedict said they still need a 2/3 majority. So there had already been a mechanism for there to be a way to limit the votes to get to a conclusion if they were to stalemate. But at one point, they could have decided to opt for a simple majority or have the commission, or like a committee, make the final decision. And what Pope Benedict said is, it has to be a vote by the whole college. It can't be a committee. It can't be anything other than a 2/3 majority. So, yep.
Something a little other than the conflict on the day. Who were the neighbors? I know you go to the pallbearers.
At the funeral, they are the gentlemen ushers of the Basilica of St. Peter's. They're laymen, yes. They've got an official title, but they're laymen. And like at big papal funerals, they're always, or big papal events, they're in these like burgundy-colored tie and tails. I mean, they look like butlers, but they're called like the gentlemen ushers or something like that. And it's an official office. They're laymen, but it's like a full-time job. And it's probably handed down from generation to generation, from father to son, for centuries, like a lot of Italian kinds of things. So, all right,
So like
Jay.
when someone got, during the conflict, started talking about his concerns and his beliefs, that really doesn't happen.
That does not happen in the Sistine Chapel. It wouldn't happen. Whether the dramas would take place at the meals like they did in the movie, I kind of doubt that. But when they go back to the Domus and they're having meals and conversations, there might be some of that going on with conversation. Whether they get up and address the whole room, doubtful. I think it's far more polite than the movie made out to be. But nobody gets up and talks in the Sistine Chapel. And in fact, there's no translation going on. And in there, they're only using the ritual and speaking from the ritual, which means they're speaking Latin. So there are other people who said, who takes care of them? There are other people who are put under the oath of the conclave. And the movie did that. You had the nuns. There is an order of nuns, I think, that does some of the cooking and taking care. But there would be lay staff. There are medical personnel for when they need it. There's certainly security personnel. Some of the cardinals that might be infirm have priest secretaries who might be in the area and can be around to help them. But every time they go in, they all have to leave. In the 2005 conclave, Cardinal, he was the retired Cardinal of Washington. Who? No, before him. No, this is going back to the 70s. Oh gosh, drawing a blank on his name. But he was still eligible to vote, but he was very frail. He used a wheelchair, and his priest secretary, whom I knew, he was under the seal, under the oath. He wheeled him in every session, got him out of the wheelchair into his seat, and then he had to go out, but he was helping him get out so he knew about the Pope before the world did. So there are other people who are floating around who get them into the room. Then they all have to leave, they close the doors. I don't think they do the big announcement each time. I think that only happens the first time. But there are all the people who work in the Domus Sancta Marta, the custodial people. And the interesting thing this time is they built the Domus to house 120 cardinals, and apparently some of them are going to have to double up. Don't know how they're going to do that. I guess it's going to be by order of seniority. But there are going to be some cardinals, because they can't put them anywhere else, because then they'd be out of the bubble. Maybe they'll set up cots in some common rooms or something. I have no idea. But it hasn't really been said how they're going to do that or who's going to get roommates. Yeah.
So, Monsignor, after the first vote, they say they haven't picked or come to the majority they need. Does the group know who was the leader, what the numbers were?
Yes, so because they're reading out all of the votes, and they'll say at the end, they'll say, the movie did it, at the end, so-and-so 15 votes, so-and-so 20 votes, so-and-so, and they all know the number. They got to get to 90. I mean, that's public knowledge. So, at the end of the ballot, they will say, the vote is inconclusive, we adjourn for the night, we'll burn the ballots, or we move on to another ballot. So they'll know. It's all, they're not sitting there waiting to find out. And because they're calling it out, and most of them will sit at their places, and they'll have pads with the list of all the names, and so they'll make their little hash marks and count alongside everybody else. Great. Well, thanks for coming out, everyone. Have a great night. And thanks to all who joined us online. Oh, we're off. Okay.